Okay, Carissa, here's the photo that you've chosen. Now, let me start by saying that resolution is going to be a big issue with this photo. The first thing I saw was the image size. I went to look at the actual number of pixels, and you're just far too low. I mean, I think I talked about this early in the semester. If I didn't make this clear enough, the smaller the image, the more difficult this is going to be. And 470 by 880 pixels is just not enough information. You need at least a couple of megabytes worth of information. And you know, obviously, this is just, it's very, very small, which makes corrections very, very difficult. So the first thing that you need to do is have this image redigitized so that you have more information. Otherwise, it's just simply going to be too difficult. There's just going to be too much noise. There's just not enough pixel information to work with. But I'll do the best I can with demoing with this version for you. First thing I'm going to do, of course, is I just need to make a basic tonal correction. I had posted a process for you guys earlier in the semester. You want to start with some kind of tonal correction just to give yourself a better idea as to where you need to be working toward. Until you have that tonal correction, you can't even really see everything. Of course, everything should be with adjustment layers and layer masks now, so I'm just going to create a levels. I'll just hit auto to start with, and then we just knock up the midtones a little bit so it's a little bit darker. So now I have some nice strong shadows, still very bright in some areas, but that's okay. Okay, so that's good enough for now. This next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just duplicate my background layer. I always want the background layer to be the original photograph, so that if I make a mistake, the original information's right there. I'm going to press Control J on the keyboard and duplicate that layer. And then I'll just rename this, I'll call this the retouch layer, because there's going to be a lot of general retouches that are needed on that layer. And this is just if I really need to name this general correction. Okay, so now I'm making sure that I have things labeled. And for this, I would actually, you're talking about this area here, I'm guessing these lines that you have. For this, I'm going to suggest that you actually use the vanishing point tool. Because you do have some information over here that you can clean up and maybe work with, but I think that the most appropriate thing to work with may actually be vanishing point. Now, I didn't test this before I fired up the video here, so we'll see how this goes. So I'm going to go to Filter, actually make sure I have the right layer selected. Filter, oh, and vanishing point's not available because this is grayscale, so let's make this RGB for now. Don't flatten. Filter, vanishing point. There we go. And I can just take it back to grayscale later. Okay, so first thing I need to do is set up a grid. So, and the house lines are going to make it really easy for me to do that. So, actually, I'll just start with this kind of grid here, and then I'll just extend the grid. And this should look familiar because we did play with this early on in the semester. Okay, so now I have a grid set. I'll grab my clone stamp tool now. Zoom in here a little bit, and I'm going to sample. This area looks like it's fairly appropriate, so maybe I'll just start here, and I'm going to use this cross section as a starting point. So I'll click on that. Now it should help me out with the vanishing point. I'll just maybe go right here. This looks like it's not that bad. And I'm just using the clone stamp to paint some of that information back in. Now, not perfect, but it's helpful. Okay. Now you can see what I mean. The biggest problem that we have here is that there's just so little information. As I zoom in, you can just see every little pixel. But that did clean it up fairly well. I still have some issue up here, so I'll probably want to, since I did kind of change the tone a little bit down here, I'll probably want to carry that into here. So because my clone stamp is going to follow, maybe I'll create a new source point. And I'll come down in here, paint some of this in, so that it's more appropriately toned. Make this a little smaller so I can work in here in smaller areas. So it's just basically like a repaint here. I'm going to have to get in really tight in some of these areas. And it's not perfect. I'm making some mistakes here. You can go back and fix it. But now that you have more appropriate tone, then some of these other tools will be useful to us. And of course you do the same thing. This other side is actually a little bit more complicated, but you can do the same thing on that side as well. We could add another grid. Now let's see. Man, that's kind of strange angle. And do the same thing over here. Grab the clone stamp, move up a little, Alt, and increase the size, and come down and begin to paint some of that out of the way. So you can see that just, that helps us with some perspective. Again, not perfect. You're going to have to fix some things manually, but that's a good starting point. And then once you have that, you can go in to the original image here and start. Let's grab the. Well, we could actually use the patch tool a little bit now that we're a little bit closer on. Like, this part here, we could drag it over. That's going to do an alright job. Drag that over, line those lines up. That doesn't have to be. Okay, and then this is just a little strange here, so we may not be able to do that. Nope, that didn't work. And again, you can see the pixels. I mean, it's just going to be very difficult to work with in that respect. So, but you now have at least a little bit more information than you had before to work with, so you can make some of these corrections. You can clean it up a little bit. Of course, the tough part is there's just so much grain that it still doesn't look fantastic. But hopefully you're getting the general idea here. Across the top, you're just going to have to crop that. There's just no information there. I mean, that's actually something you can just do right off the bat. Just grab that crop tool, clear out your dimensions, and enter. So, and you can even take out a little bit more because there's some top and bottom there. Enter again, and then we can see the difference. Some of the now we just have that straight line there, but that's not terribly distracting. And you're going to need to get in there and do some blurring, particularly if you can. I mean, I really hope that you'll get a more appropriately large image. But the blurring will help a little bit with that grain. Just getting into these diffuse areas where it should be fairly smooth and taking tool across it. Try to stay away from the lines because you don't want to soften those lines. That's looking a little bit better now. More appropriately toned. And some of this variation in tone that you're getting, you can either try to paint it up a little bit or kind of attribute it to shadows from the trees, because there's obviously some tree shadow here. Where you are going to have to be careful is right here. See how there's a white line around? So you're really going to have to get tight there. with the clone stamp and clean that up. So hopefully that's helpful. Like I said, number one thing you need to do is you just got to get a larger image, and then from there you can use some of these tricks that I just showed you.